Well, welcome to our newest psychological health talk. Today we're going to talk about the psychology of teamwork. Now, last week when we talked about the psychology of excellence, one of the things that I mentioned was that in order to really achieve excellence, it often, almost always requires that there be a team that is supportive of an individual who is identified as excellent or some kind of outcome that turns out to be excellent. And so the psychology of teamwork becomes very important. Now, in some ways it's similar to the psychology of relationships, but teams are specifically designed to achieve some outcome. So that's the difference between a relationship, two friends that are getting together, that are just wanting to catch up and get to know each other again, or two people who are in a romantic relationship. There might or might not be elements of that are involved in trying to achieve an outcome, but oftentimes the relationship in itself is the outcome that's desired. When we're talking about teams, at least is the way that I'm using it today, we're talking about a group of individuals who come together with the effort to work together to achieve a specific outcome, to accomplish some kind of task. And therefore, it's a little bit similar to relationship psychology, but there are some unique differences. Also, as a disclaimer, this is 30 minutes, so we're not going to get into everything about the psychology of teamwork in a 30-minute talk. This would be hours and hours of the data that we have that would help us to understand teams in a fully functional way, but this will provide an interesting introduction. And the basis for it today comes from some work by Janice Bowers and Eduardo Salas, who wrote a book, Making Decisions Under Stress, and they talked a little bit about how teams function and how you can help teams to be effective in the most serious of circumstances. We're going to draw from some of their research as we talk about this today and look at teams. So let's dive in and let's start talking about some of the qualities that are essential for effective teams, effective groups of individuals who are working together, trying to accomplish some kind of task and bring about some kind of outcome. So we're going to talk about several different aspects as we go through today, and we'll talk about each one of them as we go forward. So the first thing to do in any kind of effort to pull together a team, and we're talking now about being a leader of a team or an essential component, or maybe you're the person that organized the team, the first thing you want to do is provide for the members of your team, an honest self-critique. Individuals who say, I'm the leader, just do what I tell you, are notoriously ineffective at putting together effective teams. You still might accomplish an outcome, particularly if the outcome is one that isn't terribly complex, but the efficiency of the team, the effectiveness of the team will be diminished if the team leader appears to be a step above the team itself. In fact, part of functioning as a team is to function as an individual who says, I am a part of this rather than I am above it. So those individuals who are reluctant to share some of their own self-critiques, some of their own difficulties, will have a harder time with it. Remember a particularly glaring example of it. So I was asked to conduct a post-action assessment for a group of law enforcement, and what had happened was that there was a number of different departments that came together in pursuit of a subject, and the outcome of it was that the subject had there were shots fired to stop the car of the subject. The subject was eventually arrested. The outcome was a pretty good one, but there was an after-action assessment, and I was asked to kind of spend time facilitating that after-action assessment. And one of the things I noticed as they were trying to talk their way through what had happened was that everybody on the after-action assessment was a little bit guarded until one of the officers, an officer who was a veteran of the sheriff's department that I was working with, said, "Okay, this is what happened with me. I was in this situation. The car was stopped. The suspect was behind the wheel of the car. He began to move directly towards me. As he was doing that, I found my vision narrowed down to really pay attention to him, and because he was directing his car at me, I knew I was in some kind of danger, so I had my weapon and I was firing into the engine of the car. I could hear that there were things around me, but I wasn't able to actually see what the other officers were doing because I was so focused on the potential danger." Now, as he said this, a remarkable transformation happened in the group, and other officers began then to share their experiences much more openly. It was started because one of the officers was willing to say, "This is my experience. I wasn't the super person in this situation. I was doing my job, and this is kind of what my experience was while I was going through that." That loosened up the opportunity for everyone to be able to speak more freely about what each of their experience was, and they all learned a lot more from each other once that occurred. But it started with a self-critique. When you're working with a team and you are wanting that team to really function well, don't see yourself as above the team. See yourself as connected to them. I have these strengths, I have these deficits. I'm looking for the team to help me to be able to maximize my strengths, to be able to account for my deficits by other people maximizing their strengths, and that's what a good team actually does. So that's the first of the elements. Now, the second part of it is that to be a fully functioning team, you have to be willing to accept feedback from others. Personally, I hate this part of it because I'd like to pretend that I'm always right and that I never do anything wrong and I can never benefit from anybody else's feedback. While I'd like to pretend that, that's actually a pretty foolish position to take because that feedback is the way that we get better. And when we're looking at a team that's fully functioning, that ability to give feedback back and forth is essential for the team. So we look at the work of Dr. Amy Edmondson, a psychologist who's talked a lot about psychological safety. And one of the things that she points out with psychological safety is that the team begins to function better when everybody can give feedback without risk of being sanctioned or diminished because they gave feedback that was difficult to hear. When that feedback is accepted, then what ends up happening is that there are discussions in which the team learns much more rapidly and becomes much more effective much more quickly. But that requires that each person in the team feels like it's safe to give honest feedback. And that starts by each member being willing to accept feedback. Now, it is distressingly the case that human beings normal way of learning is by making mistakes. Let me say that again. The normal way that human beings learn is by making mistakes, getting feedback on those mistakes, correcting the mistakes, trying again, and doing better the next time through. That's the function of feedback. I'm doing this, it's this percentage correct and this percentage incorrect, and if I get honest feedback, I can correct the part that wasn't working and get better at what I do. So an essential part of the psychology of teams is to create an environment in which it's possible and beneficial for each member of the team to hear feedback, not as a way to put them down, but as a way to improve performance of the entire team, to take advantage of the normal way that human beings learn, which is by trying something, making a mistake, getting better the second time through, because you've gotten accurate feedback. We can go too far with that, of course, and sometimes people give feedback as a way to put somebody else down rather than a way to make corrections and do better. So there's a refinement, a skill to providing effective feedback, and there's a refinement and a skill to accepting feedback. But the first thing that I need to do in order to be able to make my team function better is to be willing to hear feedback that is honest and helps me to see what I can do better going forward. And in any kind of team, that will be an essential component. So a third component is to focus on task-focused feedback. One of the reasons why feedback is difficult to give and receive is that sometimes it becomes person-focused. Somebody tries to put somebody else down rather than focusing on the task itself. So if you get feedback from one of your team members that what you did is stupid, that's not particularly helpful. If that's the kind of feedback you're giving to someone else, it's not particularly helpful. In an effective team, the feedback is task-focused, meaning it's clearly related to the objectives that you are trying to achieve. So if somebody in your team is, let's say this is a team you're trying to work with a customer in a business situation, and somebody spends an inordinate amount of time with talking about personal things with the customer and never gets around to talking about the value of the product and how that would help the customer, the feedback might be, so you did a great job with establishing rapport and getting to know your customer better. The thing you need to do better at is helping a customer to see the value of your product so that that product can be seen as a solution to the problems that that particular customer has. That's a task-focused kind of feedback rather than a person-focused kind of feedback, which might be, you spend way too much time. You're just interested in relationships, and you can't do that. So there is a kind of a need to stay focused on the goals, stay focused on the outcomes, so that the feedback helps you to move toward accomplishment of the task. The feedback isn't simply to point out what somebody did wrong or even point out what somebody did right, but to stay focused on the team, on the outcome. So we need to provide specific and constructive feedback. So one of the things that you'll often hear, that might be in a work setting, or it might be in a family setting, somebody says, "Good job." Well, good job isn't a very specific kind of information. Um, so what part of what the person just did is the good job? So we'll take it as an example. So somebody sits down with a customer. They get the customer to buy the product, and other members of the team say, "Good job." Well, what part of it was good? Was it that you spent a good amount of time really getting to know and listen to what your customer actually wanted to accomplish, that you were able to draw out what the problems were that they were engaged with, you were able to identify what kinds of things they had already tried and what had worked and what had not worked, so that the customer really felt heard. And then when the customer really felt heard, you were able to say, well, would you be open to a suggestion for something that you could do that would help you to solve the problem, providing a bridge to be able to then identify how your product is going to be an effective way for this customer to be able to solve the problem that they have. That's a specific kind of feedback. It's much more specific than good job. Good job, person might think, well, as long as I talk a lot to the customer, I'm doing a good job because that's what I was told. I did a good job. And so they talk longer and longer and longer and never get around to actually presenting the product. Or maybe a different individual says, good job, I presented the product as a solution to the customer, but I didn't realize that part of the good job was establishing that rapport, really getting to understand the customer, really getting to know what their needs are and what they've tried, and how our product provides with a unique solution for them to be able to solve their problem, and therefore will become a repeat customer for us. So the more specific it is, the more likely it is that that customer will actually be much more satisfied. And the more specific it is, the more likely it is that that team member will learn and apply the lessons that they've learned to their interaction as a member of the team in order to be able to accomplish the task that the team is involved in. Now that requires a little bit more thoughtfulness in the kind of feedback that we give. General feedback doesn't work as well as specific feedback. Telling people what they did wrong is not as effective as telling people what they could do better that would help them to be able to perform better. So specific is being much more clear about what specific behavior, specific set of actions you're talking about. Constructive is talking about how to do it better, not simply talking about what went wrong. So those two elements are really important parts of a good functioning, psychologically effective team. Pay attention to the specifics, pay attention to making sure that it's constructive, not simply talking about the failures. So it's also necessary when you are working in an effective team to make sure that you encourage effective participation. There's some background to this. So first of all, there are some people who are very comfortable in teams and very active and will tend to speak up and participate a lot. There are other people who tend to be quieter and they may be less likely to participate in discussion during a team setting. That doesn't mean that they're not thinking. It doesn't mean that they're not coming up with ideas that might be beneficial. it means that they are not as likely to contribute that. So this happens in groups of different sizes. The ideal size for everyone to participate in a group is somewhere between 8 and 12 people. If you get beyond 12 people, get into a 20 person group or a 100 person group, one of the things that happens is that the quiet people tend not to speak when the group gets larger. And so it may be necessary, if you need to work with a team that's a larger team, to break it into smaller pieces so that there's room for quieter people to participate. If you get too small a group, 2 or 3 or 4, while everyone participates, there's sometimes not enough diversity in a very small group for the team to benefit from different ideas. And one of the things that will tend to happen in those situations is we tend to engage in what's called groupthink. So the person who speaks first tends to define what the group is going to be talking about, and everyone else kind of molds their responses based on what that initial person said. So that group of 8 to 12 tends to be kind of a sweet spot where there's enough diversity, enough different ideas. It's still small enough that you can draw in individuals who tend to be quieter, but you may need to do that drawing in by asking quiet people to participate. So you might say, well, we've heard from this part of the group, but you haven't given us your ideas yet. Can you tell us what your thoughts are about this? And that invitation will sometimes help that quieter individual to feel comfortable talking about what it is that they have on their mind. It might be necessary sometimes to say, I'm looking to make sure that all of the ideas are represented. So we've heard kind of one idea. I'm wondering if anybody else in the group has an alternative explanation or an alternative thought about this, to invite some level of constructive disagreement in the group to be able to work through and get a broader sense of participation. Those things are really necessary to invite that active participation. Now, it is also the case that culturally, in most groups, when the groups are made up of both men and women, it turns out that culturally men are much more likely to be active in groups and much more likely to dominate those groups. And part of that is that women tend to, first of all, wait for someone else to finish speaking before they add their idea. Men are more likely to talk over each other. This happens on the playground when kids are growing up, and so it becomes more of a style of communication. It's not necessarily true that all men are like this or all women are like this, but there's some tendencies in the culture that means that sometimes it's necessary to invite women to participate. Now, it is also the case, and this happens far more frequently than most men realize, that a woman will present an idea in a group, and the conversation will continue a little bit, and then a man will rephrase that same idea and give that to the group, and the group will respond to the male voice more than the female voice. And as a result, women feel like they're not being taken seriously and not heard, and when that happens, they stop speaking. So if you're leading a group, you want to make sure that you acknowledge and promote the ideas of the female participants in the group so that they are given an adequate hearing and they are discussed as that individual's ideas, not waiting for a male to rephrase it and therefore get credit for it. And this happens a lot. Happens even more when the leader of the group is male, and the leader of the group then does that rephrasing, because then the leader of the group is given credit for ideas that actually came from others. So that need to create participation is a little trickier than it might first seem. It's not just let's get ideas from everybody, but it is necessary to make sure that you draw that out in ways that, first of all, create opportunities for individuals who can promote or add ideas that are not the mainstream ideas, that might be adjustments to or even disagreements with a main idea, so that there's a broader sense and a better, fuller understanding of the whole of the effort to accomplish this task than just one direction and not much willingness to challenge ideas, but also to make sure that those people who are maybe a little more reluctant to add ideas are acknowledged for the information that they give. So it is also necessary then in any kind of team focus to spend a little bit of time paying attention to the teamwork aspect of how the team works together, not just to focus on the task. So while the team is organized by definition in our talk today to accomplish a task, it is necessary to identify that there is a teamwork part of being able to accomplish that task. So we don't lose focus on the task, but we also recognize that this is a joint project. One of the things I talked about last week when we were talking about the psychology of excellence is that there are many ways that we discover that when we take a person who's acknowledged as a high performer, an excellent individual, a genius of some sort, and we remove that individual from the team, they don't do as well, because the teamwork is a part of accomplishing that whole task. So it's necessary sometimes to just acknowledge, wow, we had a really good discussion. I really appreciate that we had some diverse ideas here, that not everybody agreed, and that we took some time to talk about different options, and that's part of what it means for us to function as a team. Or I really appreciate the feedback that we got today, that this and this worked, but this still needs work, and we still need to be working on this, and that's a part of how we function as a team. So don't hesitate to acknowledge and recognize and advocate for how the team works. Now, as the team gets larger, as I mentioned, if we get into teams of 20, 30, 100, or even larger than that, it is often necessary to make sure that you take time to break down so that there's discussion among different groups, different elements of that larger team, and that then gives an opportunity to bring that information back to a larger discussion. One of the things that I often see is that ends up being just a report back rather than, okay, now we've got this idea and this idea and this idea. Let's take a look at how that feedback looks, where there are opportunities to identify what's different about each group, and what we can do to help us to move forward, meaning sometimes resolving some of those differences or acknowledging those differences and recognizing that we need different groups to work on different aspects of solving the problem. So all of these are part of what it means to be to have a good functioning team, to create and use the benefits of psychology to help you to be effective as a team and to become a high-performing team, not just a high-performing individual. So be sure and take your time to pay attention to our talk today. Give yourself an opportunity to like it if you do. Subscribe to our psychological health talks, and keep coming back as we investigate more of human psychology and how it helps us to get through our lives. We appreciate your attention, and thanks for participating today.